Hi, we're still in Joshua chapter 5, and I want to read Joshua 5 verses 10 through 12. Now the children of Israel camped in Gilgal and kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. And they ate of the produce of the land in the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. Then the manna ceased on the day after they had eaten the produce of the land, and the children of Israel no longer had manna, but they ate the food of the land of Canaan that year. There are several things going on here, and they all happen within a 3 or 4 day time span. Joshua has just recircumcised all the men of Israel, and they are camped near Jericho, ready to take this city. They're at the place, they're at Gilgal, which is where Joshua had put the 12 stones that they took out of the Jordan River. The first thing that happens here is that they are healed. Now, we don't know exactly when they were circumcised, but the tradition says that they were circumcised on the 11th day of Nisan, which is only 3 days before Passover. Now, either they were miraculously healed, or else this was the second Passover. There's always if you missed the first one because you were unclean because of a dead body, or you were traveling, or for some other reason, God allows you to do the Passover in the second month, the month after Nisan. So it's possible that this was actually in that second month instead of in Nisan. The next thing is that it says that they kept the Passover on the 14th of Nisan. Now, according to the commandment, the Passover lamb is killed in the evening of the 14th. And it says that they kept the Passover at twilight on the 14th. So this is probably at the end of the day on the 14th, going into the 15th. We don't know whether they ate the Passover on the 14th or they ate it on the 15th. But it says, they kept the Passover on the 14th day of the month at twilight on the plains of Jericho. So it's not real clear. I mean, it seems at first like they ate it on the 14th, but Jewish tradition has the lamb killed at the end of the 14th and eaten right after dark on the 15th. The next thing that happens is that, let me look at it again. They ate of the produce of the land on the day after the Passover, unleavened bread and parched grain on the very same day. So whether this is the 15th of Nisan or the 16th of Nisan depends on whether they ate the Passover on the same day it was killed on the 14th, or if they ate it on the 15th. The reason that this is actually significant is because the 15th, for one, is a high Sabbath. There's no work allowed on the 15th. So where did they get this grain? Was it grain that was already stored, or was it grain that was growing in the field? We know that it was grain that the Canaanites had planted, and we just don't know who harvested it. Now, on the 15th, you are allowed to do work that's related to what each person needs to eat for that day. So you can cook and you can prepare food, but you can't harvest. And there's another complication that until after the first fruits offering, which is done according to some on the 16th of Nisan, and according to others it's done on the first day following the weekly Sabbath on Passover week. Either of those could be accurate if this grain was eaten on the 16th. Well, we don't really know if it was on the 15th or the 16th. If it was on the 15th, then this must have been grain that was harvested the year before, because you are allowed to eat, well, let me just read to you from Leviticus. The law about when you can eat the grain in the feast of, or the day of first fruits, is in Leviticus 23, verses 9 through 14. I'm only going to read to you verse 14. You shall eat neither bread nor parched grain nor fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your God. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. Now this is referring to new grain from that year, not to the old grain. So you're allowed to eat the old grain right up until the day of first fruits. Well, you're allowed to eat it whenever you want, of course. But you're not allowed to eat the grain from that year's harvest until after the day of first fruits. So if this was this year's harvest, then it must have been on the 16th that they ate it after the after the priest's blessing of the day of first fruits. Excuse me. More likely, I think, that this was grain that was already stored because they were just circumcised. They didn't have time to go harvest anything. This was probably grain that was stored up in storehouses or in jars that they found in the city of Ai or in the villages around there. The next thing that happens is the manna ceases the day after they eat the produce of the land. God had been providing this manna all through the wilderness and feeding the Hebrews. But now they're in the land, they are conquering the Canaanites and driving them out. They eat the produce of the land, and immediately the manna stops. This wasn't a punishment. God wasn't punishing them for eating the grain of the land. This was a graduation. This is the way life is supposed to work. Manna is a miracle, and manna is not the way that we are supposed to live. God doesn't want to spoon feed us. He wants us to grow up and provide for ourselves. Adam, when he was put in the garden, he was given a job to do. And the Israelites, when they moved into the promised land, God required that they drive out the Canaanites, that they till the land. There's no free ride here. Even in paradise, even at the end of all God's promises, he still expects us to work, to do something. It's a graduation, not a punishment. So here's the timeline of all these things that happened. On the 14th, they kill the Passover lamb. Either at that same day at twilight or on the 15th, they eat the Passover. And then either on the 15th or the 16th, they eat grain from that the Canaanites had harvested before they got there. And then there's the Feast of First Fruits, whether that's on the 16th, as Jewish tradition has it, or on the first day of the week after the weekly Sabbath, as the Karaites and many Hebrew roots people say. I don't know. The text isn't specific. Anyways, this is Jay Carper from American Torah. Be blessed.